Welcome back. You're still watching the Power Breakfast Show, and now we get to discuss something different. Of course, something that has been making headlines and continues to make headlines even on today's papers across all major newspapers. The main headline was the IEBC talks. And to help us discuss this matter, I have a very strong panel next to me, very fine gentlemen, young legislators, young people who are involved in leadership. And on my immediate left, I have Senator Stephen Sang, that's Senator from Nandi County. Karibu sana Mheshimiwa. Asante. Next to Senator Sang is Brian Weke, the Executive Director, Institute of Education in Democracy. Karibu sana Brian Weke. And of course on my extreme left is none other than Moses Kajwang, Senator Homa Bay County.
Thank you and good
Karibu sana Mheshimiwa.
Asante.
Now gentlemen, of course a lot has been said. A lot is happening. Finally, we've seen white smoke. The white smoke, as they may put it. Finally, Court and Jubilee seem to have an agreement on going forward. But there's still some issues. A quick look at all the newspapers this morning. There's still a few nitty-gritties that need to be agreed on. The people who want the president and the opposition chief Raila Odinga to actually sign off on the agreed, whatever is agreed upon in Parliament. There are those opposed to it. Are we really there yet? We'll start with you, Mheshimiwa.
Thank you. I think there is some good progress in that direction. However, I think this small, you might call it a small issue that needs to be addressed, but to me it's still at the center of the entire framework. If we have to agree that this is a parliamentary process, which I think to a certain extent all of us have agreed it's a parliamentary process. Once we agree that it is a parliamentary process and a parliamentary initiative, then the issue of the former prime minister and the president coming in to sign the document does not arise, because they are not members of parliament. So I think for me, when you see this kind of disagreement on who endorses the final product, that still takes us back to the initial discussion whether we want to agree that this is a parliamentary initiative or not. However, for me, I would want to call upon the two sides that let us not take more time discussing the form and the format. We need to spend more time discussing the content, so that then we can even cross that bridge when we get there. So really, I think that should not be an issue. We should be able to, we have now done with 2 weeks. We agreed initially that we want to give this committee 30 days. So we are already chewing 14 days. We need to get into the substance of these issues, then we can move on.
But Mheshimiwa, you must agree that the form and format is very important, and there are those who see that a parliamentary process basically locks out everyone else, yet electoral reform is supposed to be all-inclusive. Yes, what do you think about that, Bonaweke?
Thanks, Indinuli. As a civil society, we've been very clear that ideally we wanted an all-inclusive dialogue.
Yes.
We wanted dialogue where you would get different stakeholders and different experts in relation to elections coming together.
Yes.
And we're looking at LSK, we're looking at civil society, faith-based and private sector. But in all fairness, where we were 2 weeks ago was quite worse. I think for now, let us work with what we have. And as a civil society, we are also discussing on how to create a reference group so that our work can also plug in the work of the Parliamentary Select Committee on IEBC. Now, because where we are, and we have to try and create lemonade from this lemon. Clearly, we are saying this is lemon, but we have to try and create lemonade. Now, we have key fundamental issues, because I've had a number of stakeholders and even lawyers saying that one of the key things that we have to agree on is how to remove commissioners. Of course, others are saying, let's disband the commission. And I can tell you as an electoral expert, disbanding the commission now would be a very tricky affair. So let us, this talk of disbanding the commission is very confusing.
Okay, and we'll come to that because we will still discuss about the nitty-gritties, what we really need to talk about. First and foremost, let's start with the form and format, as you put it. And Mheshimiwa, your side of the coalition is seen as probably the one championing the process. You went to the streets to push for this talks. Finally, you have it. But isn't there a risk that going through Parliament, as it is right now, it is being seen as a Jubilee Code affair? Yet electoral reforms should include all other parties that are not even in parliament, the civil society, and even the law society, and any other person. Isn't there a risk that someone may actually say this process, because who knows, maybe come next year it won't be Jubilee or CORD?
Thank you. We would have wished to have a process that is all-inclusive, like Brian Weke has said. If you flash back to 1997, we had the NCC initiative and the IPPG initiative. The NCC was much more broad-based. It brought together religious bodies and civil societies and political players. We would have wished to have that kind of setup to unlock some of the issues that affect us and lead to those 5-year cycles of violence. But there has to be a middle ground. You can't always have your way. And we as CORD, we have said, fine, if the president is willing to meet us halfway and we set up a forum within the structures of parliament, then that is good for the nation. Because what would have happened if you would have insisted on an NCC kind of arrangement, we would still be on the streets today. And then, of course, there are the evil forces that have always taken advantage of our demos to cause mayhem and to rob and to burn property. So I think where we are, we should celebrate the gains that we have made. In as much as we are going into parliament, we now need to go back to parliament and consider the motions that are coming up to define what exactly it is that these committees are going to discuss and how they are going to be able to engage external parties. We have seen a framework for public participation in parliament. It has not worked excellently. And you know, it's not something I can be very proud of, that parliament does excellent public participation. But in setting up this committee, we must be very clear on the nature, duration and structure of public participation so that we can bring in the civil societies, we bring in the political parties that are not represented in parliament, so that ultimately the report that comes out of this committee is reflective. Now the issue of signing off, this as CORD, we are again looking at the experiences of the National Accord. If the National Accord had not been signed off by Kibaki and Raila, chances are that it would have been shot down in parliament and chaos would have continued. We're in a situation where the leader of the majority has declared that whatever comes to parliament, if he does not like it, he will vote against it. We want to insulate the proceedings of this committee against such hawkish behavior, because we know that the two coalitions are led by Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, and we know once they provide their blessings in the form of a sign-off, then high chances that the report of the committee will pass in both houses.
So now, Mheshimiwa, it's good that you've made the comparison with the National Accord, but it should be noted surely that by then the then Prime Minister and the President then were both members of Parliament. Right now, Parliament and its parliamentarians who are describing this to us strangers to the House. How then do you include them in such a process?
It is just lending political goodwill. They did not sign off as members of Parliament. They signed off as leaders of the two sides that were engaged in fighting. And it is the same kind of goodwill we want to lend this process. If Wetangula signs off and Professor Kindiki signs off in the Senate, and in the other house you have Aden Duale and Mwadegu signing off. Yes, these are significant people by virtue of the positions they hold, but they do not control the forces. The people who control the forces are the President and the leader of CORD. This sign-off is more of a political goodwill. Yes, it is not constitutional, there is no structure for it, but we must always allow goodwill to be part of any process that we undertake in this nation.
Yes, Mheshimiwa, I know your side of the coalition does not probably agree with CORD's assertion that it is political goodwill. Probably you see it like an attempt for the opposition chief to be at the same level with the president.
Two things. One, I think we need to appreciate that, you know, I think that distinction between now and the National Accord times must be understood by every Kenyan. That whereas they were leaders of the coalitions, but they were members of Parliament, and they sat in Parliament as member for Othaya, as member for Langata, but they are also leaders of those coalitions within Parliament. Right now, I mean, and for us in Jubilee, even to agree to the formation of the committee, it took us our time as Jubilee Coalition, as a PG. We met with the President, we discussed, we agreed, and at that level I think we need to leave the the engagement of the President and the the former Prime Minister, to that level of political goodwill outside, you know, they will be able to marshal, and I think there is already an agreement that the two, you know, leadership of the two major coalitions should be able to give their strong word out there. But once you get into a parliamentary process, we get into a slippery ground if we continuously attempt to bring in, you know, the leadership, you know, whether, you know, the national executive, the president, the deputy, or you bring in the prime minister, you know, the former prime minister Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka into parliament. Because once you set a precedence where the executive and the other key players out there will influence processes within parliament, you can't know where to stop. So I think for me, them lending that political goodwill from the parliamentary groups, you know, once the report is complete, the one side, Jubilee side, will be able to present that to us, and we agreed in our PG that eventually that product has to come to us as a, you know, Jubilee parliamentary group. I'm sure CORD will do the same. Yes. And the two principals will be able to give their political goodwill at that point. But the process within parliament has to remain parliamentary. Yes.
Let's go to Bwanaweke now. Do you agree that these two leaders need to, because it is a political process at the end of the day, and they are the political figureheads for both sides, what role should they play now that they are seemingly not being allowed to participate in what is happening inside parliament?
I think now that we are agreed to do a parliamentary process, I think the key word that we need to use is political goodwill. The question of who's signing, who's not signing, who's appending the signature, to me, those are non-issues. The question is, do we have goodwill on the part of the president and on the part of the opposition? And I think for us, even this discussion, let us move to serious issues, because there are bigger issues than just signing, who is signing, who is endorsing, who is not endorsing. And in the Muli, let me just move you now to serious substantive issues. Number one, I've had talks that, of course, you know, the biggest question that we have to deal with is whether the commissioners are going to be sent home, which, of course, if you look at the last Ipsos Innovate research, 72% of Kenyans are actually saying commissioners needed to go home. So the question is not whether, the question is how. Now we have Article 251, which clearly stipulates how these commissioners are supposed to go home. Now in the Muli, I can tell you for a fact as a lawyer, if you go through that 251 route, we are not going to achieve anything. Now the other question now is, are we able as a country to amend Article 251 through a constitutional amendment? And if you go to Article 255, it is very clear on amendment of the Constitution. You can do it twice. One is through a parliamentary initiative, and number two, through a popular initiative. Now, Article 255 is very clear that if you want to change and discuss issues to do with independence of the commission and the judiciary, then you have to go for referendum. Now, having said that, you cannot purport to amend Article 251, so which means the only clear route that we can deal with this impasse is actually to discuss a send-off package. Because for you to remove commissioners in office, you have to actually go for a referendum. We don't have that time. Article 255 is very clear. So number one, and I've seen there is goodwill on the part of commissioners, and they are saying, because I saw the chair speaking in different social networking sites, and they said, look here, if we leave office in a dignified manner, then we are willing to leave office. So I can tell you for a fact, legally, the only route that we are going to use is speaking to the commissioners so that they can actually vacate office. And the earlier, the better. As we speak in the Muli, we are in June. Election year starts in August. And I can tell you for a fact, we do not want to be in a situation where we want to change the election date.
Okay, Mheshimiwa, your party is clear that the commissioners should simply be fired. No send-off package at all. In fact, I know a member of your party, Jacob Midio, said it would be illegal, if I may quote him, it would be illegal to actually talk over a send-off package for these commissioners.
In the Bully, there's a collective responsibility, but then there's also the individual burden that the commissioners carry. I personally do not support a situation where we condemn the entire commission in a blanket manner. I think individual commissioners must be given an opportunity to be heard and to be tested on some of the accusations against them.
We do not have time. Can we now start investigating each commissioner, then find out if
Article 251 is one of the, I don't know whether it's dangerous or it's the best articles in the Constitution. First of all, you cannot set up one tribunal to try the 9 commissioners, unless the 9 are being charged with similar offenses. So, even if you're setting up tribunals, you'll have to set up 9 tribunals to set up the 9 different commissioners. And as Brian says, Article 255, anything that threatens the independence of commissions is subject to a referendum. However, I think there are several ways that these commissioners can leave office. One, people forget that they can resign voluntarily. And unfortunately, when we see what is happening in the Supreme Court, no one in Kenya seems to want to leave office voluntarily for any reason. But we can go into the IEBC Act and say that the IEBC shall comprise of 5 commissioners. Right now there are 9. So if the Act has changed, what will be the transitional mechanisms? We can say that since now we need 5 commissioners or 3 commissioners rather than 9 commissioners, then these jobs have disappeared, and we provide them with a package so that they can go home and we start another process. However, before just on that, in the Muli, getting these commissioners out of office is not the end. It is a beginning. And no wonder a commentator said we seem to be clueless on what we want. The ejection of commissioners is just the beginning. I hear debate that now we should look at the secretariat. But the more fundamental thing is we must look at the election laws. We must look at the IEBC Act, the Elections Act, and come up with some minimum, define the minimum reforms that we cannot afford to go into the next election with.
Because there's also a risk of getting into a vacuum if at all the commission just goes home wholesome and you're yet to elect something to reconstitute the commission, as it were, and then elections are coming. Then the back and forth between CORD and Jubilee, then what happens? We get to elections, you do not have a body. You've been accused of that, and you've been accused of having a hidden agenda behind that, your coalition.
In Ebola, we started the calls for restructuring of IEBC in 2014. The Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, which is still in place, and the chair is still in place. 2015, we came up with proposals called the Okoa Kenya draft bill, and it was quite heavy on proposals on electoral reforms. These IEBC, conniving with the Jubilee government, killed it. If we would have just agreed to sit down, and remember in 2013 we called for dialogue, the same dialogue that we are now having. It's just that now we are doing it in a parliamentary way. We raised the alarm a long time ago. In fact, sometimes I wonder, Mheshimiwa Sang and his coalition, what took you so long?
Mheshimiwa Sang.
We have enough time. I mean, listening to Brian Weke, I agree with a lot of the issues that Brian Weke has mentioned. But I think it is important to note that this is why we insisted all along, that the moment you sidestep the Constitution and the laws, you run the risk of not getting to know where you are headed to. These kind of discussions that we are now having, whether or not the commissioners will go or not, how they will have to go, the send of packages in terms of, the number of commissioners, and the discussions as to how to deal with Article 251, 255, how to deal with Article 88 of the Constitution. These are the issues that we said. If you went outside the law, you are unlikely to tell, it is like a train. You take off, the rail, you can't tell when you are likely to come back to the, to the rail. So really, this is why we are saying it's better off to anchor some of these discussions within the parliamentary process, so that even as we discuss and as we have the two sides discussing within that joint committee, you are alive to the fact that you have these various articles of the Constitution, you have these options available for you, certain options are not available for you. So really that for me is important. But as Jubilee said, we said 3 critical issues. One, that we should not have a situation where we have a vacuum. That we will not agree, because I think we have a feeling that is the direction that the court wants to take us to. 2, that we are also not willing to have a situation where you shift the election date. We are uncomfortable with the shifting of the election date. We know that every Kenyan knows that the election, the next election will be in August 2017. We are not comfortable with shifting that election date. We have a feeling that our colleagues on the other side have a hidden agenda that seeks to extend.
Would you kindly expound on that hidden agenda?
I mean, if you look at, we are now discussing about sending away the entire commission. That is the position taken by CORD coalition. If you look at the law, you have to in fact, if you have to bring in a bill to amend the constitution, because what they are asking for must be, must involve a constitutional amendment. You will need some 30 days within.
Which article will you be amending?
Even at that article 251.
You can't.
It affects the independence of a constitutional commission.
Allow him to actually. That even led more credence to the argument that then if you have to amend article 251, then you have to proceed into a referendum. That referendum may take us another 3 months, 4 months, 5 months before you realize you have a minimum of about 12 months to carry out this amendment. That takes us to some time next year around June. Definitely you can't have a new commission that will have to organize elections in this country within a period of 3 months. And therefore, the most likely situation, since you have already disbanded this commission, is that then you will have to work on an election timetable for the new commission in terms of what they need to do, and that may take us another 1 year. The question that this guy, the Code Coalition, will be raising is that Uhuru's presidency ends in August next year or thereabout. Then you have a period of 1 year that you have to find some transitional mechanism. And that is the Nusumkate that this team will be looking at.
That is exactly what I wanted you to bring up, so that you have an opportunity to defend yourself an answer.
No, I think let's drop this Nusumkate business from the table, because we are not interested in Nusumkate. We saw the kind of duplicity, the kind of betrayal that comes up in Nusumkate. Even Sang, who's a member of URP, these guys have been betrayed big time in this Nusumkate business called Jubilee. They are just quiet. If you hear Mheshimiwa Keter crying, it speaks for the silent majority within URP who feels they are getting a bad deal.
So that's not what you're pushing for.
So that's, we are not looking, we don't want to be crybabies the way URP is crying quietly within the Jubilee coalition. But
practically,
in terms of, let me take you back to serious issues, because you see, we started these things in 2013. 2014 we had an agenda on electoral reforms. 2015 we had an agenda on electoral reforms. 2016 we had to go to the street. People had to die. Property had to be destroyed. For the president to come up and say, fine, I'm ready to talk, that is a kind of hardline positions that we don't need as a nation. These are things we would have sorted out much, much longer. I still hold that there could be a way of dealing with the issue of commissioners through amendment of the Elections Act. PLO Lumumba woke up one day and found his job was not there. And so it's not the first time. And the people who are watching us today and celebrating are the commissioners, because they know their jobs are so well protected within the Constitution that unless Parliament moves in an partisan manner, they'll preside over the next elections. We in COD would not want to contemplate an extra day of Jubilee rule. We are not keen on extension of election day. We want elections to be held
and away from the politicians, because I know each side has its own agenda. I want us to discuss the risks. Apart from the risk of having a vacuum. What are the risks do we face as a nation in terms of this talks and the timeline, and with elections just being around the corner?
Now let me say this, because I was part of the reference group, civil society reference group that crafted the constitution. Now Article 251 and Article 255 was meant to secure the independence of different institutions. Now I want to also say, Kajwang, Honorable Kajwang is my senator back in Homa Bay. You cannot purport to amend the constitution through a piece of legislation. Now the mere fact that you did that to PLO Lumumba, it is unconstitutional. Now these guys, immediately you do that, they will actually go to court. And I can tell you it will be a protracted court battle. Believe you me, there is no any other route. The only route, if you're amending the IEBC Act, introducing, and as per Article 250 of the Constitution, which provides for 3 to 9 commissioners, then you amend and say now the law provides, there is no vacuum. Those guys will be in office until their term expires, then you appoint your 3. So there is no shortcut. I can tell you for a fact, you cannot purport to amend the Constitution through a piece of legislation. Now, guys, the route, and I've heard the chairman saying in the commissioners, they are willing to discuss. They are willing to vacate office, because the public is very clear. 72% of them are saying, we need it, you guys need to leave office. So believe you me, the only route, and that's why you see commissioners are quiet, the only route that we will deal with this impasse, negotiate with the commissioners. That is not to say that if you've been mentioned in a PAC report or in a certain report, or the allegations of you eating chicken or whatever you are eating, then that needs to stop. No, those processes continue, but let's vacate these commissioners from office, because I can tell you for a fact, if these commissioners with the current public confidence levels, if they run the next elections, even if Jesus was to cleanse them, believe you me, we will plunge the country into chaos. Now, key things after removing the commissioners, because that is now the one of the biggest things. How do we set up a selection panel? I've seen an amendment bill that proposes that Jubilee appoints 2, CORD appoints 2, then 3 from the Public Service Commission. Now again, if you look at processes of appointing an EMB, there are 3 different processes. Number 1, expert-based EMB. Number 2, political parties-based EMB. Number 3, a mix of the 2. Now, in this country, we cannot afford to have a political-based EMB, because we are not in transition. Kenya has matured. It is a matured democracy. It is not those days of Kanu where we came up with IPPG. So I can tell you, and those are the key issues that we need to look at. Look at the issues of which Kajwang was talking about, amending the IEBC Act and reduce the number of commissioners. Look at a country like India, which is a big economy. It is a big democracy. They only have 3 commissioners. So number 1, we have to deal with the issue of sending home the commissioners. Number 2, reduce the number of commissioners and stagger their terms. As we speak, all these commissioners' terms are coming to an end the same day. So again, we did not envisage a situation where we look at institutional memory. The other thing that we have to do, and by the way, we are not disbanding the commission. And I like what Kajwang said, we have to agree on the minimum reforms. We can't disband the commission. There is no time. And by the way, if these things were to happen, they have to happen in the next 1 month. Because once we get into August, we are within the election year.
So now, as we wind up, because we've run out of time, and I wanted us to talk about also the issue of change of tone of these rather extreme leaders from both sides, who after spending 3-4 nights in police custody came out and they have now changed their tone completely. They're now singing a different tune of reconciliation. I want us to discuss that as a final thing. But also, now, going into Parliament, and we know the risks involved. Are we sure this thing will work? Because already there are problems in the formatting. Yes, in the form and format, there's already a problem. This might take too long. Already we say we only have 30 days. Is this the first test? Can we come up with a form and format? And can we do this within the 30 days? If we are not able to get an agreement within 30 days, what happens?
You know, that is why I said from the word go that, and the Kajwang mentioned something that I want to clarify, that our position as Jubilee has always been that we were open to dialogue. But we said let it be handled within the framework of provided institutions. I don't know why it took CORD, a whole 3 years to realize that the only route to have national dialogue within the framework of the Kenyan Constitution is through Parliament. They have, they went to the streets, they went to the, all the other avenues, but eventually they came to our original position, which was that we had to go through.
It is the haggling within the political class that is really of serious concern, because you have time limits.
And I will tell you this: if we still have stalemate on the basis of who signed, the greater issues are the ones that Brian Wekas mentioned. How do we select the new commissioners? To what extent do we want to reform the IEBC? CORD are insisting on just the commissioners. We have also issues as Jubilee with regard to the secretariat. We need to agree to what extent we need to vet the key managers, because eventually the decisions made by commissioners actually have to be implemented, and sometimes they come from the secretariat. So we need to agree on the extent to which we need to reform the IEBC in terms of the secretariat and the commissioners, and if it means us talking to them. And I think the public opinion is out there that a lot of Kenyans, I think, are keen on ensuring that we have a new IEBC to manage the elections. So we need to take these discussions away from who signs or who does not sign to the real issues, because within the next 30 days or so we need to have an agreement.
Now, gentlemen, we're really running short of time, but there's a serious concern with the selection of the team members to represent either party at this as part of the Parliamentary Select Committee. We've had names like Moses Kuria, Johnston Mudhama, who are hardliners and are known to be people who might not agree. What happened last week aside, should we expect a change in the selection of these panels from within the parties, from your side especially?
Well, we put out some of our best brains. Some of them could be warriors, others are intellectuals. James Orengo understands the history of this nation like none other than Sang and I. We respect him immensely within the Senate. So I think that mix, you know, it cannot just be a group of intellectuals. You have to.
You need warriors in there.
You need to put a few warriors. You need to put some intellectuals to get things going. But let me talk about this motion that is coming before the National Assembly. We are talking of getting this thing done in 30 days. It won't kick off even in the next 10 days because National Assembly will have to discuss the motion this week. Senate will have to discuss the motion next week. And we hope that Senate and National Assembly will agree, will come up with the same picture of what this committee is going to do, because if there's a difference there, if Senate believes its mandate should be broader than what the National Assembly thinks, then we have a stalemate. And that's why we keep talking about political goodwill from the leadership of the coalitions.
Now, gentlemen, we really have to wind up, but I'll give you one more chance to talk. But as you speak, because this will be the last opportunity you have, kindly, then 15 seconds or so, comment. Do you think the change of tone in these warriors, as he calls them, from extreme views to now calling for national reconciliation, do you think it's genuine?
No. Quickly, I think what we are saying is that these are extraordinary times and we need extraordinary measures. We are also saying that there has to be goodwill. And goodwill starts from the names that you present.
Yes.
So even as we sit to choose names of who would represent different sides of the coalition, please let us have, and Honorable Kajwa, I'm calling them warriors, the best brains. Please let us take this matter with the seriousness it deserves. When we are appointing the 7-member team, let us that so-called goodwill and political goodwill should be seen in that process. Now you've asked me about this hate-monger, and you know, I was just discussing with somebody that the psyche of our people, the psyche of Kenyans, now these people who are hate-mongers have all of a sudden become the so-called Jesus Christ as mandate. And clearly these people will actually be re-elected just by the mere fact that we're in the police station for 3 days. So anyway, we can continue praying for them to continue with the same we've seen them we've seen them in the past. After they've been arrested and they've been threatened to be arrested, they change their tone. So we hope this will continue, and we can only pray for them.
Okay, gentlemen, we really have to wind up. I know there's so much we can say. We really have to wind up. I know. Are they genuine or not? One word.
I want to say this. For us, institutions mandated to deal with hate speech must do their job. Irrespective of whether we agree on issues or not, the next election must be peaceful. We have to discuss the electoral management processes, but the hate speech mongers must be dealt with, whether they come from Jubilee or
well, I mentioned to Kaparo when he appeared before us that if they're not doing their job, then let the police do what they are supposed to have done. Institutions, I agree with Sang absolutely. You cannot use the police cells as a laundromat for warmongers. Someone says Brian Weke should be killed, and then after 3 or 4 days is the one who's looking like a hero. You know, it can't be.
No, it's a joke.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. We have to wind up now. That has been Senator Stephen Sang, Senator Nandi County. Then next to him, Brian Weke, Executive Director, Institute of Education in Democracy, and of course, Senator Moses Kajwang from Homa Bay County. Asanteni sana. Well, that's it. Let's take a break.